This video is me thinking out loud, so come enjoy the ride with me. China's population may be under 1 billion people. This is one of the busiest streets in Shanghai, Middle Huanhai Road. And on some days, it looks like a normal bustling commercial district, but on many other days, a quiet place, peopleless during normal business hours. And obviously this wasn't the case, say in 2018. A detailed thread on Zhihu, which is China's Quora, shows that in the past, before the pandemic, the street shops were lined with people, 365 days. Now, sometimes you're just walking and suddenly get stuck in a human traffic jam. And you don't even need to see what's ahead. You already know that someone's lining up for something. And this is far from the only place in Shanghai seeing a drop in people. Metros, for example. Now, certain lines used to be packed, of course, have actual downtimes and empty train cards. In 2025, a Chinese vlogger visited the Bund, and he says that it is packed with people. This is during the Chinese New Year, but not as many as before.
然后人的话有，但没有想象当中那么多。但我估计啊，个人估计晚上人应该不少。
The malls are decorated, lanterns are up, Spring Festival vibes are ready to go, and the people just aren't there, or at least there's no more enthusiasm. The food shops that used to have lines out the door, there's less people now. You walk straight in, there's no queue, no pushing, no waiting. The question is, where did everyone go? Sure, if you're still taking, say, the 11th metro line in Shanghai, the busy office workers, they're still packing the train, of course, during rush hours. Or if you visit the Huanhai Road on a Saturday evening or maybe afternoon, and you might still get the foreign tourist or the local crowd. During festival seasons, of course, there are still people around everywhere, because it's China. And even in metro stations, it still looks like there's plenty of people. But something feels like it's not the same as before. Something feels off. Sure, there's still people, lots of them in China, everywhere, but just not as many as before. Okay, now maybe everyone just went back to their homes for the holiday. Maybe during the Chinese New Year season that hometown is the destination to celebrate. That seems all right, normal, right? Migrant workers going back to the countryside, smaller towns filling up, and bigger cities get quieter. But here's the problem. By this time of the year in China, from those videos during the Chinese New Year, by that time, they should all be back. The factories will be running, offices will be open, schools are in session. And yet on the ground, you see people keep filming clips that basically look like it's not the right time. You have thinner crowds, quieter streets, half-empty metros. And here's another part where you feel it, the rental market. A shop owner in Shanghai says back in the days, his location was insanely competitive. One little unit, 10 people will be fighting for it. But by early 2025, not only are many shop fronts sitting empty, even with rent cut in half, nobody seems to want them. Here in this video, a restaurant owner in Shanghai had to close one of her food places after nearly 10 years. Why? Well, one of the factors is that in certain months, 70% of the office buildings will be empty. Now, this isn't just Shanghai. Landlords in Beijing, Guangzhou, Wuhan, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, and Nanning, these are all major cities in China. They're all telling similar stories.
呢度一間，前邊仲有2間，又係空置咗嘅。呢一欄全部都冇鋪頭嘅，前面都係好冷清啊！想當年疫情之前，世貿天街都幾旺下嘅。咁落去成個商場都可以執埋啊！
Looking at smaller towns, streets are empty, businesses are closed. Back in the 1990s, when China officially had only 1 billion people, everywhere was packed. And you were afraid to go outside because anytime you go, you were dealing with bumping into people. Now, we're told that right now there's 1.4 billion people. So why does it feel emptier? Where did the 400 million people go? Officially, the 2023 population statistics say that China's total population is about 1.41 billion people. Now, people in mid-sized or larger cities count for about 560 million. People in smaller towns and rural areas count for about 850 million. Now, I just want to take a moment to break down this misconception that you might have when it comes to personal perspectives on their surroundings. It sounds hard to believe that if you lived in a large city and you say that, or we claim that you've lost, say, 1 million people, as let's say a city like Shanghai, 25 million people. Losing a million people or a million people going somewhere else sounds like a lot on paper, but it's actually not going to look like much when it comes to such a great scale of people. Here's a great example using the sort of outside of China example, the perception of population, that is. New York City has around 8 to 9 million people. Since 2020, around 500,000 people have left, moved to other states, excluding those that passed away, of course. New York City before the pandemic often required you to line up for a restaurant for like 2 hours, or maybe it takes a huge amount of time to go from one place to another. Now, many places don't even have lines. And traffic is much worse going across the Holland Tunnel back in the days into Manhattan. Now, we barely get congestions. I'm not saying that there's no congestions at all. I'm only saying that during rush hours, you do get those things, but many times more, it's pretty okay. You don't feel like you're losing 500,000 people in the city. So is that also the case with China? Well, as it turns out, no. Let's first break down the idea that people moved out of the cities. So if the cities in China feel empty, relatively to before, are people all going back to the villages? Well, no. It seems logical on paper until people started going out to film those villages in the countryside. One person goes to a place in Zhejiang called Siming Mountain Village. He introduced it on camera like this.
这里呢，现在也被称之为无人村，因为这里荒无一人。
And there's many of these on Chinese social media. And on camera, you see there's paved streets, there's neat rows of houses, some of them look pretty new. There's a public square, there's a standalone villas. But not many of these villages seems to be inhabited. But this place actually has a unique story because if you go on the Chinese Wikipedia, Baidu, this was once a proper, prosperous place. And this place was even named a model village in the province of Zhejiang. In 2006, the village had 413 households, about 1,100 people. And it was once called a model prosperity village. And this is supposed to be the demonstration of all villages to have this moderate prosperity. So how do you go from a model village to a no people village? Well, there's even an article claiming that this was once some sort of a high-end strategic relocation of the entire village into the town, but it never explained where those people actually went. So where did they go? Mars, parallel universe, multiverse, or simply disappeared? Now, if people are disappearing from cities and villages, where are they going? At the same time, there is one place that seems to get busier: crematoriums. A funeral home worker in a county-level city in Guangdong posted a video in 2024. His county had a population of only 300,000, but he says that the funeral home is packed every day. You need to take a number and get in line to handle your loved one's cremation. Now, outside of China, media reports show similar things. For example, in March 2025, The Guardian questioned satellite imagery showing long lines of vehicles lined up outside of crematoriums and funeral homes after China ended its zero-COVID policy back in late 2022. And furnishers were running around the clock and still couldn't handle the number of bodies. But here's the key question. How many bodies are we actually talking about? In the official 2022 to 2023 statistics from the Chinese Ministry of Civil Affairs, one thing is conveniently missing: the number of cremations. That line just simply vanished year over year. What's actually the reason behind that? Well, some say it's just an economic downturn. People don't go shopping, perhaps they don't go outside, so the streets look empty. Crematoriums, maybe it's because of the aging population, which is another big issue. It also doesn't answer the question because the life expectancy of Chinese people have gone up. Now, others say that maybe things like e-commerce, everyone's buying online, so brick and mortar shops die or shopping streets look empty. But again, these are all true to some extent, but it doesn't answer the full picture. Now remember, China's rural and smaller town populations are officially around 850 million. So if anything, the outside of cities areas should be more populated. At some point, you run into this uncomfortable conclusion, which is what I have come to, is that if there is a large-scale population change, something undocumented, the only actor with full data is the Chinese Communist Party. No private company, no independent institution, or even a full national movement can be done to change that. Only the Chinese government can get the data. And so, of course, from data collection to the final publication in China, everything is extremely opaque. Population is the foundation data. It determines economic potential, labor force, military manpower, and market size. It is literally the bedrock of national power. So of course, you can understand why the CCP would manufacture numbers or to lie about this kind of stuff. Now, other countries' experts are obsessed with the question, is China's population really 1.4 billion? Well, in my view, not after COVID-19. But David, no country can hide losing hundreds of millions of people. Yes, they can. China can. Forced organ harvesting, it's happening in China. The CCP can cover that up. It's a nationwide hospital operation. Concentration camps in Xinjiang. China can cover that up. An actor died, Yu Menglong, and no one hears about how it actually happened. A series of Chinese lockdowns in Shanghai, Xi'an, Xinjiang region, Wuhan, a lot of these cities and many more for months on end, and really you don't hear about what happened there. Long before the pandemic, people were already doubting the actual numbers or the Chinese population. For example, back in 2018, Russian media circulated claims that China's true population was only 800 million and not 1.4 billion. And one Russian website, Peekaboo, published a piece called China is Faking Its Population Data. It cited an expert named Viktor Mikhailov who supposedly used grain production and import-export data to estimate China's population at around 800 million. And other Russian outlets supposedly added up officially published urban population figures and came out with only 280 million. So then what they did was using China's own 60% urbanization number, and the reasoning was if 60% is 280 million, then the total population was somewhere around, say, under 500 million. And even if you're generous, it can't exceed 800 million. Now, these stories then bounced into Chinese language media, which is, where, because I can't access the Russian ones. But there was a problem. Most of these studies really never came from a formal research lab or an expert, right? And the methods were never fully explained. We just simply got the headlines. And so they were more treated like rumors with numbers attached. And more recently, a YouTuber named Lay's Real Talk claimed that the actual population in China is somewhere around 500 million, as she used estimates and AI models based on the average total fertility from 1949 to 2020. And this is also factoring things like Mao's responsibility for murdering almost 100 million Chinese people, as well as things like the one-child policy. So it eventually slowed down the TFR, which led to the claims of the around 500 million population number. So that's another one. And then there's also the Japanese salt calculation rumor, right? Some online forums were circulating claims that a Japanese researcher in 2019 took China's edible salt production, about 6 to 7 million tons according to an industry report, and then assuming a certain per capita daily salt consumption, concluded that China can only have about 800 to 900 million people. Now, is that totally crazy? Well, not as an idea, because using salt to estimate population is quite decent since everybody needs salt. It's a necessity. Everyone literally consumes a baseline amount. You can't consume infinite amount of salt just because you're rich, because you will literally die. And you also don't usually, hoard things like packs of salt like you do with gold or silver. So in theory, salt consumption is a good estimate for approximating the population. But again, real life is messy, right? Some people cook blandly. Some people eat very salty food. Some salt go into food processing. There's also inventory, exports, and everything. There's a lot of industrial stuff mixed into the numbers. So the Japanese salt story, again, never got a proper sort of recognition because they never really showed any proper calculations. It's just a back of the envelope sort of math. Now, at best, there are things that are estimates or hints, but not proof. So the first serious expert-style challenge comes from Yi Fushan, who is a professor, I believe, based in Michigan. He says that the Chinese population, using official data from 1991 to 2000 and from 2001 to 2016, the reconstruction of fertility and mortality rates, and so that China's real population, based on his estimate, was around 1.28 billion, which is more than 100 million lower than the official 1.388 billion at the time. Now, this is again important because he's not saying that there's 500 million people or 800 million people. What he's saying is that the numbers are inflated, but on the orders of tens of millions, maybe 100 millions, not half of the country. So it's not as bad. And then in 2022, something big drops: the Shanghai police database hack. The hacker, calling himself China Dan, claims to have breached the Shanghai Public Security Bureau's database and extracted records on about 970 million people. He posts a sample of 750,000 records and offers the rest for sale on the dark web for about 10 Bitcoin. Now, obviously we can't contact the hacker directly, but people have tried to use their sample, calling the phone numbers of these people to confirm that, yes, these are actual real records. You have real names, real ID numbers, real phone numbers. Now, Yi Fushan and others also noted from this leak that the Shanghai Public Security database is essentially the national registration system. And because Inside China, the police data network is all interconnected. So this essentially means that that is the national registry. Now, if the leak really contains the entire population, then the number is not 1.4 billion. It's under a billion. It's 970 million. But here again, we need to take a pause and ask the question, what exactly does 970 million records mean? Is it every living person, or is it every person with a certain type of ID? Are there separate databases for minors? Are all the records unique and up to date? Are people who died still in the system? Are Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan data included or not? None of that, obviously we don't know anything about this, but the leak is real, and it shows us that the interpretation is murky at best. However, it still proves to us that the government has a massive connected database on this. It might not include every single person, but at least includes 970 million people. And before we continue, there's a great initiative I was recently told by a group of Chinese tech experts in the United States. What they're working on is sending direct links for Chinese people in China to access the outside world. How they're doing this? Well, this thing is quite expensive. For every $2,000, they can generate 100 links that people can easily click onto and be able to access the free web, bypassing the censorship. For some data you might not know, less than 1% reported people in China actually know how to scale the firewall, and those that do tend to be on the younger side. However, with these 100 links, it provides unrestricted access for an entire month for tens of thousands of people. And so this great effort caught my interest and want to share it with you guys. So if you want to support this action, consider checking out the donation link. It's in the description below because this is your direct impact to help contribute to the fight to topple the Chinese Communist Party and its firewall of censorship. And it's probably the most effective way to help Chinese people see the outside world, hear the outside world, and read the outside world. And that's also a mission of mine, which is to give hope to those inside China that there are voices amplifying their concerns outside. So again, consider checking out the link in the donation and support this initiative. It's tax deductible, and you'll be getting real usage reports to see where your money is being spent on. So thank you so much again, and back to the video. So now we add in a third type of data, raw salt production. Now, according to industry studies from 2015 to 2019, China's raw salt production averaged about 66 million tons per year. And then in 2020, it dropped to 58.5 million tons. In 2021, 57.1. 2022, it fell below 50 million to around 49.86 million tons. That's a drop from before the pandemic to after of roughly 24 to 25%. Why did salt production suddenly fall after COVID hit? Well, in theory, you have two explanations, right? First, capacity fell because factories stopped and lockdowns cut production. Or second, demand fell. You have fewer people, weaker consumptions domestically. If capacity dropped but demand stayed the same in China, well, they should have imported more edible salt, but they didn't. Well, maybe because demand really fell. So some researchers argue if per capita salt consumption was actually rising slowly as people's diet got saltier, then a 25% drop in raw salt output could imply an even larger drop in population. So that's around 25% or more. So if you take the official number of 1.4 billion and you cut 25% of that, that's 350 million people gone. Other factors, they also say, you could be looking at 400 million fewer people, of course, largely because of the pandemic, but that's, again, still a rough number, so let's just keep going. Now, we know that raw salt includes industrial salt, exports, inventory, policy decisions, and all those things, right? So it's just, again, another piece of the puzzle that something doesn't add up. Some other numbers. We have Chinese mobile carriers reported a cumulative loss of 21 million registered numbers at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, the official reason is that there were many migrant workers who moved back home, or you have people with multiple cell phone lines, so therefore they canceled that. But that's not really a case so common in China because this happened at the height of COVID in 2020. Since a mobile number in China is attached to everything, right? WeChat payments, banking, every app that you want to log into, video games, or whatever other apps you use, unregistering a number is really not that common. And then there's also the cremation math. In 2019, UN data says China's natural death rate is about 7.2 per thousand, with a population for about the 1.4 billion mark. So that's around 10 million deaths per year. Cremation rate was about 52.4%, so roughly 5.2 million bodies were cremated annually in China, and 4.8 million were buried. So that works out to be about 430,000 cremations per month. Now, during the late 2022 COVID wave, workers, so this was after they announced that they were shutting down the lockdowns, Workers at crematoriums all over China reported workloads of 8 to 10 times higher than that of 2019 levels.
Okay, so this part I didn't really make it clear, but because in 2020 China didn't reveal how many people were cremated, we can only use the before 2020 data, which is 2019, to estimate the daily cremation rate. So what I did essentially is take the 430,000 per month cremation from 2019, divided that by 30 days to get what the each daily cremation number would be for the entire country, and that is also then divided by the number of crematoriums in 2022, and then that gives me about 8.2 cremations per day. Now, according to a BBC report from individuals in China where they interviewed, who they interviewed said that they saw a daily of about 50 to 100 people being cremated, and that these crematoriums were essentially working around the clock. Now, obviously factoring that there is unlikely to be the same type of busyness in every single crematorium across China, but you can still take that and get an estimate for an increase from anywhere from about 5 to more than 10 times the number that it had happened. By the way, this is only using data from 2019, assuming nothing foul happened in 2022. But again, we all know extreme stuff happened, and so this again is not the most accurate estimate, but it is a number or a ratio that we can at least work with.
So if you assume that cremation rate temporarily dropped from 52% to 45% because of long waits and high costs pushing some families to bury their loved ones instead of cremation, you sustain that volume by 9 times for 3 months, you can estimate something like this. Roughly 11.6 million cremations in those 3 months, plus about 14.2 million burials. So that's like 25 to 26 million deaths in 3 months. Some netizens push that estimates even higher, up to 50 million deaths in one wave. Now, the reason why this is plausible or possible is because after the lockdown suddenly ended, a lot of these people who had been stuck at home didn't ever develop the immunity to the COVID virus, that then they suddenly got it, and that was very bad. And also older people, that's also why you have a lot of these cremation-related issues coming out. And then you obviously have the recurring waves that happen after that. They call it different things like mycoplasma. They call it different things like mycoplasma pneumonia in 2023. There's also was a big pediatric surge in hospitals, younger kids. Then you have like so-called season flus. They were all suspected to be COVID outbreaks after the lockdowns ended, but they never called it that. And then you also see doctors in Guangzhou complaining about how the hospitals alone were seeing around 1,500 to 1,600 pediatric patients a day during their peaks. So when you add everything together, you have the empty streets, the no people villages, the overloaded crematoria, you have the missing cremation statistics, the salt data, the hacked police database, Russian grain calculations, Japanese salt rumor, and a US-based population expert saying that you're missing 100 million people, plus multiple waves of respiratory, essentially COVID, it's very easy to feel like that maybe China really did lose 300 to 400 million people. Maybe the real population is closer to 1 billion. Now, let's take a step back and bring in the boring calculation stuff. So, fertility rate, life expectancy, and generational math problems. In 1950, China had about 550 million people. Over the next 30 years, women had on average 5 to 6 children. Life expectancy rose from about 44 to the mid-60s. And even if you subtract 80 million unnatural deaths from famine and political movements, the net effect of that kind of fertility is massive growth. And that's how you get from 550 million to about 980 million by 1980. So from 1980 to 2000, fertility dropped from about 2.7 to around 1.6 because of the one-child policy. Life expectancy continues to rise into the low 70s. Now the population still grows, just slower, right? From 980 million to about 1.26 to 1.3 billion. From 2020 to 2022, fertility stayed below replacement and fell towards somewhere like the 1.3 to 1.0. Life expectancy continues to climb to around 78% in that period, or 78 years in that period. Huge birth cohorts push the population up a little bit, around 1.4 billion, and then it peaks, starts to decline today, right? That generational pattern, the big boom, the slowdown, and plateau and decline, is fitting with the official data from the UN or even Chinese statistics. But if you want to argue that today's real population is about 1.4 billion, you technically don't have the ground for it. Because at minimum, you're losing 100 million people just because you're overestimating your data. And we also can't fully trust the Chinese data. the math works out, right? Just as we explained, at least there's 100 million lower than what is actually being reported. And then plus all of the extra stuff. So if you want to argue today that China's real population is about 1.3 billion, actually you'll be at least, more correct than the official numbers, because at least according to Yifu Shen, that's where things line up. But considering we had 3 years of zero COVID, and considering that we have all of the other evidence suggesting, such as the 2022 leak, that China's population is much lower than what is being reported, then there's no way that today's population in China is 1.4 billion. And the fact that there could possibly be less than a billion people in China is very much a real argument. And here's where things get interesting. So let's say if we can calculate exactly based on the number of missing people from that 1.4 billion, I think we will end up somewhere around 1 billion. And that actually lines up with the leaked data from that hacker, but also lines up with somewhere north of those Russian and Japanese estimates. If we go a step further and claim that China only has around 500 million people, well, then you would have to claim that almost all of their recorded growth since 1950 was fake, and that hundreds of millions of real births either never existed or they were simply, wiped out. Half the population vanished. I simply don't think we're there yet in terms of the data that supports this. But there's other ways to look at this. For example, Luis Martinez, a professor at the University of Chicago, published a report stating that China's economy might be 60% smaller than we thought. He used nightlight satellite maps and electricity usage, and it contradicts official statistics due to the fact that the economic growth is correlated with increased electricity consumption, and yet the amount of nightlights from China seen by satellites does not correlate with that number. So if we are to believe China's population is nowhere near its official numbers, then we also can't believe that their GDP is real. And actually, if their GDP isn't real according to this study, it could likely be the reason that their electricity usage is not matching, because obviously they don't have the same number of people, or as we thought. Now, Professor Martinez looked at 184 countries between 1992 to 2008 and compared the growth of lights at night in each country to the growth of GDP of that particular country reported. What he found is that, as expected, when night lights grew, all countries typically also reported a GDP growth. But when making a distinction between autocratic and democratic countries, a clear pattern emerged. Autocratic countries typically reported a whopping 35% higher GDP growth numbers compared to the nightlights growth. And so for China specifically, Martinez states that based on his analysis, China's GDP growth between 1992 and 2008 was likely 4.9% per year rather than its average reported growth of 6.3%. So that tells us that they might not be working with the actual number of people that they're telling us. Again, this is all based on numbers. The actual experience, if you go to China, and you're going to see people everywhere, especially if you go to the tier 1 cities. The major cities, just like you would go with LA or New York or Chicago, there's a lot of people. So the question is, where does this leave us? Well, the simple answer is it's awkward. It's an interesting middle ground. China's 1.4 billion people in 2020 is probably on the high side. And after 2020, before the end of zero COVID, I believe that China has lost anywhere from 300 million to 400 million people. And there's now credible data to suggest that the real figure is more like something around, I would say, lower than a billion. Now that we have credible numbers to back up or circumstantial numbers to back up the claim of below a billion, I think it's very worth to explore and be skeptical of the 1.4 billion people that they say. Obviously, there's a population decline now, and it's going to be a very problematic situation for China. I think that it's time for us to take seriously, not discount, any claims so far. Now, some of them might be pretty wild, even for me to believe, but I still think that there's enough circumstantial evidence, because we'll never get the direct evidence, to think something is up. So thanks so much for watching this episode. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you worked up your own calculations, share those with me as well. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.